Okay, now that I'm officially recording, let's go over what we're doing tonight, which is a custom texture, creating a seamless texture, and then we'll jump into, we'll break for a lab, and then we'll jump into the actual assignment that's due Thursday. So, I'm going to open up one of the textures that I don't know if everybody grabbed all those images off the off Blackboard last class, but one of them was this roof tile. And so basically the goal of this is to create a texture, and you can utilize this technique for any texture for utilizing in your renders when you assign materials. This is like creating a custom material that when it starts to tile and repeat over and over again, it doesn't look like a tiled object. It'll look like a seamless image across whatever surface you're utilizing. For an example, I'm just using a slate roof, but you could think of this as like grabbing some special fabric that has those, like the leather fabrics that have those like the buttons that like imprint, and so like if you had just a small texture and it repeated over the object, it would start to tile out really weird. And so this is a way for you to basically create a seamless texture so that it doesn't look like it's a repeated pattern over and over again. And you get those lines that just don't look right. I think most of you probably know what I'm talking about without me explaining it very well. At least I don't think I am. At any rate, so the first step is to basically take, if your background image is locked and it's a background, it's not a layer, to create a layer. So if I double click on it, click OK, it creates a layer. And you'll notice that, you know, if we look at the top of this image and the side, and like the left side won't necessarily match up with the right side when it tiles a bunch of times, nor will the top and the bottom. So what I'm going to do is first look at my image size. And right now, because since I downloaded it off the internet, it is 72 dpi. I'm going to change that to 300 so that it's a smaller image, but the resolution is really good. And it's not about necessarily how big this image is, because if we get it, if we tile it correctly, or if we make the image tileable so that it's seamless, it shouldn't matter how big the image is, right? Because it'll never show those seams when it's repeated. So I'm going to click OK to resample it to 300 dpi. Not resample it. There's a difference between resampling and so if we click the resample button, and so just for example, it's 72, it started out at 72 dpi, right? And if I click resample and make this 300, the size of my image doesn't change, and the pixels actually get distorted, basically. And so it kind of doesn't work the same as if I Control Z that and go to image and image size, click off the resampling, and actually make it a 300 pixels per inch. It's shrinking the image down, so the resolution is getting better. It's the other way around. It's like making it larger, but the resolution's not getting any better. I'm hitting Control plus to zoom in on that. Let me just double check that. Okay, yeah. For some reason it didn't change there for a second. So the first step, again, is to make the image 300 DPI, and then make the image editable. We're going to utilize the crop tool. So basically what I want to do is take a section of this and kind of clean it up a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm kind of cropping at one of these seams on the left and right side, so wherever there's tick marks. And I also want to make sure that I'm doing it so that I think this will be alright. But down at the bottom and the top, we want to make sure that we're offsetting, so like this line and this line should be offset from each other. So I'm going to go down one more so that when we move this image, I'll show you in a second, we can clean that up and so it appears seamless. I'm not explaining myself very well right now. So I'm going to crop the image. And under the filter settings, under other, there's a filter called offset. And what this does is it basically takes your edges and wraps them back around on each other and allows you to clean up that edge to edge. And so what we'll do is, see, like right in this area here is kind of where the left of the image meets the right side of the image. And so it's just, so what we want to do is clean that up so it looks seamless, like this continues on. And then the same with the vertical and the horizontal. So as we move the horizontal to the left and right, that line still remains there, and that's basically was the original left and right side of the image coming back together to meet. Yeah. It's called the offset filter, and it's under other. It's not this, well, no. It's under other, and it's called offset. Good. So it looks like my horizontal one is about right in here, and then the vertical one is right here. And so I'm going to click OK, and we can start to utilize the clone stamp tool to clean this up. And it's basically a paintbrush, and I'm going to use my brackets to make it a little bit larger. But if I hit the Alt key, I can select a certain area that I want to clone. So for instance, right there, and then I can move over and clone that area to another area in the image. And so you can start to clean up why does this never work when I'm trying to teach it? It works when I sit at home and do it. But at any rate, Sorry?
What's the contour again?
It's on the left hand side of the page under these quick keys, and it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 down, and it's called the clone stamp. So let's do the horizontal here. And then we can also do the vertical. This vertical one is not working out as nicely as I wanted it to. Maybe I'll try to use a larger brush size. What are you doing to me? Huh?
Your alt one's quick settings.
I have my alt set. There we go. Maybe. It's better. It's not great, but it's better. Somehow my layer's locked too. I'm not going to worry about it. So when we go back and utilize this offset again, as we start to move it around, you can see that those seams that originally were there have more or less disappeared. And so that's what we mean by creating a seamless texture. And you could take a lot more care in doing this as well to make it look really nice. But you can do this with any texture. And the other thing that we can do is, now that we have one seamless texture, we could make this thing a lot larger. And we can utilize our canvas size, and you could either do it by expanding in inches, or you could also do it as a percentage. I'm just going to do inches, and I'm going to select my upper left-hand corner to say that I want to extend my canvas in these 3 directions. And so I'm just going to make this a little bit larger, not a ton, but you could go as large as you wanted to. And we can duplicate this layer. This is killing me. Why are you locked? I don't know how I clicked on that stuff, but at any rate, duplicate layers. So we can continue to duplicate these layers and make a larger seamless texture. Somehow I'm off a little bit. And then once we have what we like, we can go ahead and select all these layers and merge the layers together so that this is all one layer. And I think I'm going to utilize the crop again to get rid of what was sitting down below. Yeah. And we could go one step further and do the offset layer one more time and make sure that, you know, we might want to clean up some of these lines in here to get this even more seamless. So like I can see there's a distinct line here and here, and so I can start to I'm not doing a very good job at this tonight, which is not boding well. But at any rate, when you're finished with the texture, if you could turn the offset tool on, and layers also, you can start to utilize some adjustment layers to maybe change the color of this a little bit. If you want something a little darker. Go ahead and for Mac users do a print screen. For Windows users, utilize your snipping tool to create an image and save that. And tonight I'll get an area up on Blackboard where you can post that too for some extra credit points. Okay? Anybody have any questions about that tool? Anybody want me to break for lab for a few minutes? Yeah? Okay. Let's break for about 10 minutes. Allow people to work on that. What's that? 2 minutes. Okay, so this is the base image that we have to work with. And basically we've got a foreground, a background, and then kind of a mid ground, lack of a better term there, which is the image itself. And so what's kind of most important about this process is kind of layer management and keeping track of what layers in front of what. And so that's a big kind of part of this assignment, besides for using your adjustments and blending modes. So the first thing I'm going to do is utilize create a new group or a folder, and I'm going to make 3 of them, and I'm going to change the names of them. One to be background, one to be the image, and one to be the foreground. And so we'll kind of use this file structure to implement our layers. And so whatever layers are on the bottom are going to be in the back of the image. Whatever layer in the layer structure, if they're on top, they're going to be the thing that's most in front that is visible. And so that's why I've kind of labeled them in this order, so that the background images are going to be in the back. The image itself is kind of going to be in the middle, and then the foreground, which will be basically like adding the people in front, right, will be the foreground. And so that'll be the last thing that we'll do. I'm going to start working with the middle, the image at first, and then I'll jump into the background. And we probably will only get through maybe halfway to the background, but it's kind of a repeated process once you get one tree looking the way that you want it to, and it's just a matter of copying those layers and transforming them in scale and size in relationship to the other trees. So I'm going to move my layer 0, which is the base image, right, into my middle section. And I'm going to start off utilizing an adjustment layer of contrast. And so really all I want to do is brighten this thing up a little bit because it seems pretty dark. And bumping the contrast up, you can see what these kind of do. It makes the blacker tones a little bit darker, but as we stretch it all the way to 100, it makes the image like a little too dark. And so we'll just kind of do that. The other cool thing that we can do is create a copy of this. I feel like I'm going to forget this thing. But we can use a filter called high pass, and the radius pixels around 5.9 are pretty good. And what this will do is when we apply an overlay to it, it's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see the difference as I click this on and off. It just adds a little bit of detail to the image itself, and maybe that can be bumped up just a little bit. I don't know if you can see, like down in this foreground area, the texture of this starts to, it just gets a little more texturized. I don't know if that's visible up there or not. Is it? Thanks. So that starts to just kind of, it's kind of the same thing as going through the HDR, at the very beginning and going to your adjustments and utilizing the HDR toning. And I'm going to say yes, but it'll flatten that. And it's like manipulating like the detail, right? As I bump the detail up, you see how that the black starts to get pops a little bit more. And so it's just another way of doing it. Typically, I've always learned just go straight to HDR toning, but I never really understood, what it's actually doing. And so if I Control Z some of this and get this back, it's basically utilizing a filter, a high pass filter overlay over the image itself. So hopefully that doesn't screw things up too much. Maybe that might be something to do kind of after we get through the process, now that I think about it. But always jumping ahead of myself. So the other kind of thing that I want to do within the image is to start looking at like this particular area, for example, doesn't look too great, and then like the ambient shadows aren't really defined very well. We could add some more detail to that, and then also we could change the light texture of this and not make it so orangey. So let's start with the windows, and I'm going to select on the layer itself, the original background layer, and I'm going to select with the quick select tool, or the magic wand rather. Alright, just those specific areas, and I'm going to Control C, Control V that. Maybe we'll keep it underneath. I don't know. We'll turn that layer off for now. And what we can utilize is a clipping mask. So I'm going to use a brightness contrast adjustment, and then use what's called create a clipping mask. So it's only adjusting the layer right below it. And so we can start to brighten those areas up a bit. When we zoom out, maybe we also want to do a hue and saturation clipping mask to that layer as well. And so I'm removing some of the saturation, the color of it. So now it's more kind of matching these windows here in the background. It's not as I'm going to rename it Windows, that particular layer, so that I know that that's the layer, that's what those are referring to, is that particular layer. You can also rename layer 0 to being the base image. Actually, that overlay is not really, yeah, that's working nicely. So I'm going to leave the overlay on for now. Another thing we can do is create, I'm going to select this hue and saturation layer here, the adjustment layer that I created. I'm going to click to create a new layer. And the reason why I first selected this adjustment layer is that I wanted the layer to be placed above it, so that we can start to clone stamp some of this on over top of this black shadow that's acting kind of funky in here. And then also I want to duplicate these hue and saturations. Whoops, I did the wrong ones. This brightness contrast, sorry. And I'm going to move it up and apply a clipping mask to that layer as well. And while I'm at it, I'm going to make that a clipping mask so that it's only adjusting the base image layer. Because when we start to put in background layers, if I hadn't done that, that brightness contrast would affect those layers below it. And so I can utilize the clone stamp that we just used. I'm going to Control plus to bring in the image just a little bit here. And I'm going to shrink my brush down using the bracket keys. The left bracket shrinks it, the right bracket makes it bigger. And the Alt, I'm going to select right in there. And I'm going to switch over to this new layer that I created. And I'm just going to brush in enough to cover that up a little bit. If I go too far, because I'm on a new layer, it'll still be looking at this wonky black stuff. And so basically we just switch back and forth and reset our stamp, and then switch back and start where we left off again. And so if I go too far, you'll notice that the black behind there starts to come in again. So go back to my base image, restamp, go back to that layer, and continue along that path. And then we can go ahead and go back to the original base image and grab some of this concrete color, and again just start to paint over this. And the color right now doesn't quite match, but we can start to add an additional, I'm going to name that layer clone layer, clone stamp. That sounds good to me. And so now we can start to look at ambient shadow. So I'm going to rename this layer ambient shadow. And if I change it, the blending mode to multiply, and use my brush and change the brush to multiply as well, and leave my opacity fairly low, and make my brush a little bigger. Alright, we can start to blend that back in. I'm going to Control Z that. I don't like it. Let's just start by adding a little ambient shadow down to the base. And I did this a lot better in the first class, I think. Yeah, I did. You can start to blend that back in with the ambient shadows. And then you can also apply this ambient shadow to underneath eaves and things like that. And pretty much wherever you have a surface that's going to probably produce a shadow. And so even underneath here a little bit. Can do it around these edges, up in here, maybe down in here. And you can see when I turn that off, kind of the difference between the two. Just adds a little more depth and character to the image. Can obviously do this a lot better than what I just did, but I'm kind of in a hurry because I have a lot of stuff to get accomplished tonight. So these are just some techniques that you can use to and apply to this image. And you can continue to add, you know, more ambient shadow where you feel is necessary. And it's always good to kind of see what you're doing, turn it on, turn it off, and see if it's actually kind of giving you the effect that you want. Right? So in order to kind of start into the background, we want to eliminate some of this extra landscape. And so we can utilize what's called a layer mask, which is different than an adjustment clipping mask. And this applies specifically to a layer. And so we talked about this briefly last class, but as we paint the normal brush and a normal overlay, so we paint black. If I turn this opacity up to 100, this starts to disappear, and I'm going to turn off this overlay. That starts to disappear, but it's really hard to kind of get that exactly right. So I'm going to Control Z some of that. I'm going to keep my overlay layer off. And we can start to go in with our, where's my mouse, with the marquee tool, the polygon. And start to section this off. And we can use the add to the marquee selection and just pan over. I'm using the space bar to pan. And so I've got these two areas marqueed off, and now we can use the paint bucket to go ahead and basically make those disappear, those background areas. We haven't deleted them from the image, right? Because if I disable, I'm going to Control D deselects. We can disable this layer mask and those areas are back again. Or we can enable the layer mask and they disappear. So instead of kind of going in with the erase tool and trying to erase all these different parts, you can quickly use layer masks to hide elements that you don't want to see in your image. And that works in a lot of, and so if you draw the marquees first and then create a layer mask, it'll say, it's basically saying, oh, we want to keep those parts and everything else will disappear. So in that certain stance, you'd want to right click first and basically select the inverse of what you selected, and then it would work in the same fashion. So let's see if we turn this back on. Yeah, I don't like that. I guess we could always apply a layer mask to this as well. So let me back up till those are selected as well, and I'll show you the exact opposite, right? So we have them hidden in this layer, and if I create a layer mask on this layer, it turned everything but those selections black. And so what I can do is select inverse, inverse selection. I know that's being really funny. Some reason it didn't want to select this area. But at any rate, it basically did the opposite of... No, it didn't. It didn't work. What the heck? That's kind of annoying that it's not working on that layer. So let's try this again, doing it the long way. I'm going to select these again. Ooh, my stomach is grumbling. I'm not being very careful with my selections, unfortunately, right now. Okay, that worked. So I right clicked and did select inverse, and so now it's selected everything but what I actually selected. And so when I select on this layer and create a layer mask, those disappear, but you can see my texture is still there in the layer mask, whereas before it was completely disappearing off the entire image. All right, so that kind of is enough as far as what you have to do to the overall image, or the overall initial background image. You could obviously play with these settings a little more. You could also start to add blending modes to some of these and change them even further, but we're going to do that more with the background stuff. So first I'm going to open up this entourage, and I'm going to utilize this sunset. Click open, and it's really saturated, more than what we want. So if I just directly drag this in, it's going to give me a warning that basically says the document has different depth than the source document, that might result in lower than expectation quality. And so the reason why is because when we look at this image in the layer, in the image mode, it's a 16-bit channel, 16 bits, versus this image is 8 bits. So we could either degrade the image, or we could upgrade this image to a 16-bit channel. And then the other thing that we want to check before we do this is our image size. And so the initial image that I'm looking at has a resolution of 100 pixels per inch. It's a pretty large image. So I'm going to say, okay, that's where we want to go with this image. And so I'm going to change its image size to being 100 pixels in resolution as well. So when I drag that in, go ahead and close this. I don't get an error message, and the resolution of both images are the same. I'm going to utilize the Control T, which is transform, and I'm just going to scale this up a little bit. I'm kind of matching what I remember the other image to look like at the moment. And if you want to show the other image as a reference, you could always open it . How do you split screen? I sometimes get it and don't. Drag it down.
Right. To right, part of your right key bars, and it puts the base and up. Yes, if we don't use it snap to you.
There we go. I'm hungry and not thinking straight. Okay, so we can kind of utilize and see that this sky is a lot more saturation than this sky. So I can use an adjustment layer called hue and saturation. and start to desaturate the background image and lighten it up a little bit. To kind of get it to be more where you want it, so it just kind of rests in the background and doesn't take the focal point of the image away. And again, we can apply a clipping mask to that, although it's not really necessary because it's the very back image. And you can start to play with different what different blending modes will do to that image as well. So maybe, I don't know, I don't really like any of them, but again, this gets a little more yellow hue in, and then we could lighten it up even further. It still doesn't quite work the way that, yeah, I don't really like the adding a mode to that one, but it's always kind of cool to see what those do to different layers. I don't know, I kind of like that, so we'll just go with that. And so now the next step is to drop some trees in. So I'm going to open up, come back to my entourage, and I'm going to work with this tree first. And before I load it into the model, I want, or the other file, drag it in, I want to make sure that I upgrade it to 16 bits so it matches the other image. And then the size of it, again, change it to 100 pixels per inch. And I can go ahead and drag it in and then close that. Control T to scale it. If I hold the Shift key while I grab a corner, it scales it in both directions. If I don't do that, you're kind of all over the place. I'm kind of looking at this tree right now, and placing that. Click enter. And you notice again the it's almost 7. The tree is a lot darker in the original image, and so we can apply a hue and saturation to just the tree itself and start to change the way that tree appears. And then you can also utilize some layer filters here, or blending modes, to make it look however you want, really. So I don't know, that's looking okay at the moment. So once you kind of get the tree looking the way that you want, we can always just duplicate both of these layers, right? And now utilize the same tree over and over again. And I think this one needs to shift just below, right? Can duplicate again. Add another tree here, and we can repeat this process for the other types of trees that are in the image. So the spruce, Norway spruce, and this other deciduous tree. The other thing that I like to do is do subgroups within groups. So we can take all of these trees and put them into a subgroup in the background and label those trees, and you could take that one step further and do another subgroup for the different types of trees that you're utilizing. so that you don't get confused. And then the other thing that we can do is after you've created all of your trees, right, we can go ahead and duplicate the group itself and take those trees and merge them together, and then utilize the same filter, the high pass filter. Let's actually go to the high pass and bump this down a little bit. Click OK and change it to an overlay, and it just kind of starts to blend all the trees together a bit, a little more uniform, and again adds a little more depth to them as well. And so that's just an additional layer. So you'd want to do all the background, right, and then copy all those, compress them down to one layer, and then utilize that layer as a high pass filter, and then change the blending mode to overlay, so that it's basically the same thing we did here, but we did it to 7 layers, compressing them down to 1, and then adding that detail on top of the 7 layers. But it's very important that you duplicate the layers and do it to a duplication and not do it to the initial layers that you created. Okay? That sounded really bad, didn't it? All right, so we're kind of running out of time, so what I'd like you to do over the next 2 days is kind of try and get the foreground or the background and the image, utilize these layer techniques to create an image that's similar to the original, but it doesn't have to be identical. And then areas where we deleted that background landscape area, you can start to use, you can copy sections of this grass onto a new layer and make it smaller, and again play with using the clipping masks to kind of blend it back in. I guess I'll just kind of give you an example of that. So if I go to my base image layer here and I select a piece of it like this and Control C V and move it up, right? So it's basically we're taking the material from there and just adding to the back of it here. And if we want to make it a lot smaller, we can do that and duplicate it again so that we can start to make a bigger layer here of us at the smaller scale. Right, and then combine these layers and merge them into one layer. We can utilize our layer mask with the paintbrush and black, right? The black for a layer mask basically makes things disappear, and so we can start to blend that in together. Maybe my brush is a little bit too big there. Let me delete this layer mask. move this down a little bit more, and create a layer mask. And of course we want to leave this edge. I'm going to reduce the opacity on it so I can see that edge in the background there. Right. And then we can utilize the fill tool to just clip that little bit out. Right, so it's a layer mask here. So it's not actually, if we disable this, right, it's still there. We haven't deleted it per se. Control D to deselect, and then I can use my paintbrush at a reduced opacity and make this smaller to start blending this grass together. And as you have your trees that are kind of touching this, you can start to blend away some of this material to reveal the tree behind it, so it looks like they're integral, that they're, you know, the same. Loss of words tonight. Apologize for that. And then again, you can start to add like a brightness contrast to that specific layer. Right, and lighten it up a little bit so that it starts to actually match this in here. And you could start to paint some highlights, right, with like maybe some yellow color. I just clicked on this to pick a new color, and I just kind of changed this so that you get like a yellow tinge, and again with my light opacity, you know, start to add a little bit of highlights to that. And so when you zoom out, it starts to blend fairly well with what's going on in the foreground. And so you can use that same technique on this side as well, back here in the background. And let's just grab this tree here, and so I can show you what I'm talking about with, okay, we'll take that tree. And so it's sitting there, you know, and it's not really looking very good, right? But we can go back to our clipping mask. And that changed this opacity a little bit greater. But you can start to blend those two together so it looks like that tree is resting in the grass. So try and get the background kind of in along with the foreground for Thursday, and then we'll talk about the people and adding some overall level adjustments to the entire image to kind of blend everything together to make it look fairly good. Okay, and then I'll also go over kind of, we want to save an image or a Photoshop file. And I'll also talk about utilizing the print screen to show the layers. So you're not actually going to turn in the Photoshop file. You'll just turn in two images. One is the final image, and the other image is showing these layers broken out. So don't collapse too much stuff. I want to see the layers that you use to put into the image. Okay? So use a bunch of clipping masks. Don't use layer adjustments. All right. you have to start over. Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't tell what you did, and it's hard to grade based upon that. So,
Right?
so yeah, we want to see it basically all the layers broken out there.